Okay. Great. You know what? We love people who come on time, so we're going to go ahead and start. So welcome, everybody. My name's Petra Solden, and on behalf of Thrive, I'm thrilled to see so many of you here. Thrive is the Alliance of Nonprofits for San Mateo County, and we're a membership-based organization. We have over 200 members, nonprofit organizations, government entities, foundations, businesses, and community leaders, with a shared commitment to strengthening the nonprofit sector and thereby improving the quality of life in San Mateo County. We have many programs focused on cross-sector collaboration, capacity building, and policy and advocacy. I won't go into everything we do because it's a lot. We don't have that kind of time, but I want to highlight two upcoming events that you are all invited to. The first is our Thrive Community Forum, which is working towards equitable vaccine access in San Mateo County, nonprofit outreach toolkits, and community needs assessment update. It's on March 11th from 2 to 4, and we're co-hosting with the Sequoia Healthcare District. Our next event that I think might be very interesting to people in this room is our Voter Education and Outreach Advisory Committee meeting. We have those monthly. We co-host with San Francisco Peninsula People Power and the Elections Office. And on March 17th, we're going to be featuring Dr. Mindy Romero. She's the director of the Center for Inclusive Democracy at USC, and she has been studying San Mateo County specifically for the voter turnout in the election of 2020, in both elections, both the primary and the general election. So it should be really fascinating, and we hope that you can join us. For today, we'd like to thank our co-sponsors, Asian Americans Advancing Justice Asian Law Caucus, the Grove Foundation, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and Menlo Together. I want to talk briefly about why we're here and why Thrive is interested in redistricting. Thrive, we really believe that our community is, to make our community better, we need to make sure that we have accurate representation and that all community voices are heard in policy making. We know that some of the most effective pathways to change are through the political system, so representation is critical. Thrive was deeply involved in voter outreach and education, and of course, in ensuring a safe and accurate census. The next step for that is to make sure that all communities are well represented during the redistricting process. For those of you that missed the first session that we had on redistricting, you can find it on Thrive's website. We have the recording as well as the PowerPoint slides. We've created a page specifically to share resources and updates for our county. We want this to be a hub of information where we can share, for instance, when all of the hearings are going to be for each of the 16 districts that are going to be doing redistricting. So Sarah, our policy associate, will put the link in the chat. We'll also send a follow-up email to this event with links, the recording, and other resources. I want to just thank Asian Americans Advancing Justice and California Common Cause for being a real help to us throughout this process. Their technical assistance and encouragement have been invaluable. So for today, we're going to have Jonathan Stein, the Executive Director of Common Cause, talk about redistricting commissions. And then we're going to have a quick presentation from Sham from lots of Asians, from Alliance for Justice, the Boulder Advocacy Program. There's too many acronyms. You know what I'm saying, about lobbying rules for nonprofits so that everybody in the room feels very comfortable about what they're allowed to do and what they have to report. I promise we'll have ample time for question and answer because this is a very complicated process. So with that, I want to introduce Jonathan. Jonathan has been such a great friend to Thrive throughout all of our civic participation work. And he's a civil rights attorney, longtime democracy reform advocate, currently executive director of California Common Cause. And before that, we worked with him when he spent 4 years as the head of the Voting Rights and Census Program at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, where he worked to increase access to California's democracy for historically disenfranchised communities, including immigrant and limited English-speaking voters, communities of color, low-income communities, and people with disabilities. He received his master's in public policy and JD from UC Berkeley. So, Jonathan?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Thrive for having me. It's wonderful to be with Thrive and with so many names that I recognize in the chat, Pam and Linda and Kit and Tracy and so many others. Thank you so much for Diane. It's so great to see so many friendly faces from our Voters' Choice Act days. I am going to zoom through a bunch of really, I think, important content about redistricting today. We have hours of content to talk about, and we have about 30 to 40 minutes to cover it. And so I'm going to move really, really quickly. California Common Cause is trying to be a hub of legal expertise, policy expertise, and technical assistance for local organizations and community members who want to get involved in redistricting. So this presentation will obviously be recorded and you can view it later, but you can also reach out to us if you have questions or if you want to get more deeply involved. And there will be links throughout this presentation that explains how you can get our resources and how you can contact us. So first, I think it's just important to say that California is leading the nation when it comes to fair, independent, and accessible redistricting processes. Why is that? It's because we had a not so great history. On September 12th, 2001, a day after the devastating attacks of 9/11, our legislative Democrats and our legislative Republicans came to a handshake deal, a sweetheart deal, that they would execute the 2001 redistricting cycle in a way that maximized the ability of all incumbents to get reelected. It wasn't a partisan gerrymander that maximized Democratic power. It wasn't a racial gerrymander that minimized the power of any particular racial or ethnic minority group. It was a sweetheart deal between two political parties to make sure that everybody was able to get reelected. And it had devastating impacts for communities around California. So as an example of those sorts of impacts, if we were in the room together, I would ask you to guess where this photo is from. And you might guess, for example, that it's from Wisconsin or that it's from Michigan or whatever the case may be. In actual fact, no, it's from the city of Watts in Southern California. So in November of 2003, a freak storm dumped over 5 inches of rain and hail on Watts, which totally overwhelmed storm drains and the physical infrastructure of the community, which is obviously not prepared for this sort of weather. About 150 homes and buildings were heavily damaged. About 50,000 people lost power. About 6,000 people sought aid from the county's emergency shelter. Firefighters rescued people from waist-deep water and hail and sludge. And the city was unable to get the assistance it needed from state government or federal government. Why was that? In part, it was because that legislative redistricting that was done in 2001 split Watts in service of helping incumbents get reelected. So these are the congressional district lines that split Watts into 3 districts. And these are state Senate lines that split Watts into 3 state Senate districts. No one felt they had to be responsive to the community of Watts. And that was, of course, exacerbated by historical inequities around socioeconomics and racial demographics, where this is a low-income, working-class community of color that is historically not well represented in higher levels of government to begin with. And then you add this cracking of the community and you exacerbate that problem. This is a quote from a congressional staffer at the time. At the time of the 2003 flood, I remember our office was trying to be responsive, but there was ping-ponging constituents between elected representatives. Watts was cut into 3 different congressional and state Senate districts. Residents who live on the same street might live in different districts. There was a lot of unnecessary frustration from constituents during a difficult time. This would have never happened if all of Watts belonged to one district. There are other examples of this all over the state of California. This was the Long Beach boot. It was drawn so that a incumbent politician could be kept in a particular district and win re-election. It forced Long Beach to be cut into 3 state Senate seats, and it split the Black community. Again, this was not an explicit attempt to maximize the power of Democrats. It was not an explicit attempt to minimize the power of Black voters or Latino voters or Asian American voters. It was instead, it was just incumbent protection shenanigans, the sort of stuff that is possible in any of our jurisdictions. And it has devastating impacts for communities on the ground. You might be asking yourself, well, does this happen at the local level? I guarantee you it does. Now, this is not from the 2001 cycle. This is a much more recent instance of a districting process that was initiated because of a CVRA claim against the city of Martinez. And in like a lot of cities, the incumbents in Martinez all lived in the same part of town and represented the same neighborhoods and had the same interests. In this instance, they all lived in the sort of skinny part of town in the middle there. And if they were to draw honest districts that actually reflected the community, a number of them were going to be grouped into one district and have to run against each other in order to continue their political careers. So what did they do? They drew city council districts that cut the city into ribbons in order to keep each of them in their own district and allow each of them to run for re-election successfully. In order to do this, they had to cut neighborhoods and communities, including a large Latinx community, and distort essentially the needs of communities on the ground in order to make sure that they could continue to be reelected. Now, there is a better way. Fed up with these sorts of shenanigans, California Common Cause, working with the League of Women Voters and other partners, drafted what became Prop 11. After a long history, actually, of fighting for independent redistricting, they finally decided we're going to draft a proposition that creates the nation's best independent redistricting commission. We're going to put it on the ballot. The woman at the podium is our former executive director, Kathy Fung. Behind her is someone you may recognize, that's Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. And behind them are allies from the AARP, who are major advocates of the initiative. The initiative at the time, you're not going to be surprised by this, was opposed by the state's Democratic Party and opposed by the state's Republican Party. They saw this as a dual threat to their interests. Schwarzenegger sort of stood apart from the parties at that time and was a bit of an iconoclast. He was one of the only prominent politicians who was in support of independent redistricting in California. What we got was a remarkably successful independent redistricting commission from the first cycle. It was well regarded, both for its process and its outcome. So what I mean by process is its composition. There is a multi-month application and evaluation and selection process. It ended up with a commission that was broadly reflective of the state's demographics in terms of race and ethnicity, and in terms of gender, and in terms of geographics. It was also well regarded in terms of outcome. It felt people came away feeling that they had done the work to hear from community. They held over 100 public meetings in 32 cities all over California. They received an enormous volume of public input, and they drew maps that actually represented communities on the ground. So this was Watts after the 2011 redistricting. The leaders in Watts decided to unify and to go to the commission to fight for a unified Watts, a Watts that was not split between political districts. And now this is possible under an independent redistricting process because that commission is tasked with going and hearing from community and putting community in the driver's seat of the drawing of lines, not politician self-interest in the driver's seat of drawing lines. And so when a set of community leaders come together and advocated for the Citizens Redistricting Commission for a change in how Watts was treated, they were responsive to that. And as you can see, all of Watts was put into one district. So we have the opportunity in San Mateo County and in local jurisdictions across California to fight for redistricting commissions that bring better process.
You know,
and
it kills
outcomes.
me, even on my new
So there are a number of different types of redistricting commissions. Independent redistricting commissions are only one of three.
What's your name on it on my account?
So Petra, I'll count on you to. Okay, can you hear me? Great. All right, so the first of the three redistricting commissions is the Independent Redistricting Commission. It's the model we have at the state level. It's the best practice if you want zero politicalization of the process. If you believe fundamentally that voters should choose their politicians and politicians should not choose their voters, you're going to want to go with an independent commission. The mechanism of an independent commission, the details are outlined in state law. The commission has to be appointed by a trusted third-party entity. The commissioners cannot be appointed by the sitting incumbents. There are specific disqualifying conflict of interest criteria. So, for example, if you've been a lobbyist, or if you're related to a sitting incumbent, or you've been an employee of a local political party, you're not eligible to serve. And most importantly, an independent redistricting commission has the power by itself to adopt new district lines for the city, for the county, for the school board, or whatever the case may be. Independent commissions exist in a number of cities, big and small, around California, and in 3 California counties. The other end of the spectrum is the Advisory Redistricting Commission. Here, members of the commission are actually appointed by sitting incumbents. There are very few disqualifying conflict of interest criteria, and they do not have the power to select or decide district lines by themselves. Instead, they go through the process, they hold hearings, they hear from the public, they educate and engage, and then they come to a recommended map, which they send to the city council or the county board of supervisors or the school district. And that governing body can adopt that map, can modify that map, or can ignore it completely. And I believe this is what happened in Santa Clara County 10 years ago. They had, the board of supervisors there had an advisory redistricting commission. That advisory redistricting commission went through the trouble of engaging the community, educating everyone, drawing a recommended map. They sent it to the board of supervisors, and the board of supervisors, if I'm not mistaken, just tossed it out and said, we're going to draw our own map. Now, so an advisory redistricting commission has its vulnerabilities. Obviously, it is not empowered in the way that an independent commission is. It can have its work essentially overturned by the governing body, but it does create more public engagement and more enthusiasm than simply having incumbents draw their own lines. You're not going to be surprised that local jurisdictions are more willing to adopt advisory commissions than they are to adopt independent ones. And so the list of cities and counties that have used independent advisory commissions in the past is quite long. And then in between the two is the hybrid redistricting commission. It's a blend between independent and advisory. The selection and appointment process is at the discretion of the local governing body, but it's usually something more independent than simply saying, I want my my last campaign manager to be my representative on the commission. There are, again, disqualifying conflict of interest criteria in the state elections code. And hybrid commissions send 2 or more maps to the city council or the board of supervisors or the school board. And one of those maps has to be adopted without modification. Okay, so a specific definition for independent advisory and hybrid commissions is in the state elections code. Now, I highlight that to say that charter cities have at least a little bit of flexibility in devising their own process. So the the city of Chula Vista has a hybrid redistricting commission, or I'll rephrase, has used a hybrid redistricting commission in the past, but it's modified at the very final stages. Its decision-making power is more in the hands of the commission than it is the city council. So it's hybrid, but leads independent. Sunnyvale is currently in the process of considering how it wants to handle its redistricting. It looks like it's going to go with a hybrid redistricting commission that actually, it's a charter city, so it can make its own decisions here. It looks like it's going to modify the hybrid model to put more power in the hands of the city council, which means it's hybrid, but it sort of leans advisory. Okay, so there's fewer hybrid commissions than there are of other kinds. Now, regardless of the type of commission, there are some best practices that are in place across the board. First and foremost, commissioners should be qualified, diverse, and impartial. There's lots of talent in our communities, and that talent is defined broadly, right? So some folks are talented because they're civil rights attorneys or they're law professors or something, and they have really extensive legal expertise. There are other people who are demographers or engineers, and they work with data every single day, and that's a form of qualification. But then there are other folks who have been rooted in community for 15 years, and they know every corner store, every grocery, every church, every park, every community center. That is its own form of qualification. You want to have commissions that are representative of the community at large and reflect its socioeconomic diversity, its racial and ethnic diversity, and its gender diversity. Why do I say that? Because the point of commissions is to create public trust in the redistricting process. For community members to say, oh, we're in the driver's seat of this process, not the city council, who obviously has their own interests in the outcome. But that phenomenon in which community sees themselves as in the driver's seat, it really only works if the commission looks like the community. And if the commission, by contrast, looks like that 10 people or that 20 people who are at every single city council meeting, or that 25 people who are at every board of supervisors meeting, it's not going to inspire the same degree of public trust and public engagement. Commissioners, in a best practice, should be selected in an open and inclusive process. All residents should be engaged and educated, and that means every community, not just the usual suspects who hang around at every single public meeting. Community testimony should be prioritized in the drawing of maps, along with other priorities like the Federal Voting Rights Act. And you want, in the end, honest maps that allow for fair representation in local government. You want people to say, I get why these maps look this way. They keep neighborhoods together. They keep communities whole. They don't split, they don't pack or crack communities in any particular way. Now, I'm not going to get into the technicalities of redistricting law, how the US Constitution places certain constraints on the redistricting process, how the Federal Voting Rights Act is at play. I'm not even going to get into the criteria that are outlined in state law for city and county redistricting. And that is, I'm happy to share more about that in Q&A or on some sort of follow-up engagement with all of you. I'm also going to point you to resources that are available on our website that have some of that content. But I'm going to spend more time on outreach and how you can get engaged in the process and less time on the technicalities of the law in this presentation. Now, one thing I really want to emphasize, though, before we go any further, is that even if there's no commission, that's okay. You still want community members to be educated and involved in this process. And we have created a website that is meant to be a hub for local redistricting trainings, resources, and materials. And you can see that at the URL here. And it has resources on fighting for an independent commission, but it also has resources that are relevant to jurisdictions that don't have a commission. Okay. Oops. So let's focus for just a few minutes on redistricting in San Mateo County. Redistricting at the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors, the method by which redistricting will be determined or be led is being determined basically right around now. If my intel from Petra and from others is accurate, it looks like the County Board of Supervisors is leaning towards an advisory commission with the League of Women Voters selecting commissioners. Now, this is an improvement over the standard advisory commission for sure. Los Angeles and San Jose, for example, use advisory commissions. And in some of those jurisdictions that use advisory redistricting commissions, there's a long history of elected officials simply appointing mouthpieces or cronies who they know will fight for their interests on the advisory commission. And so the fact that you have a trusted community group with a great reputation and credibility doing this selection, that's an improvement. Now, if you wanted to advocate for an independent commission because that was a better, that you feel that's a better approach, I think there's some room for that, but it probably has to happen quickly. And I will defer here to local experts on the ground in San Mateo County if there's further conversation after my presentation. There are a number of local jurisdictions in San Mateo County other than the Board of Supervisors that use district elections and as a result have to go through redistricting. There's a number of school districts and the one community college district. There's a number of cities and there's a number of special districts. And I want to note that in Menlo Park, there's already some amount of activism and advocacy around creating an independent redistricting commission. Pam Jones would be the person to talk to there, who she's working with some of our staff at California Common Cause. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on any of these. These slides will be available afterwards, and this recording will be available for folks afterwards. And there'll be time for conversation after my presentation about how to get engaged at the local level. Okay, so what are the opportunities for you all to get engaged in your local redistricting process? Whether or not there's a commission in your city or in your county, a new state law that should create a better, more inclusive, more community-centered local redistricting process this time. It's Assembly Bill 849, passed in 2019, sponsored by California Common Cause, backed by civil rights and civic engagement groups around the state. And it creates better practices for cities and counties only. I want to really emphasize that. It's for cities and counties only. And we're going to go into those now. And then I'll talk about schools after that in 1 second. So under AB 849, cities and counties have to hold at least 4 hearings. They have to hold at least 1 before publishing their draft maps. They have to hold 2 after publishing their draft maps. And the last meeting can float in either category. But we would recommend that cities and counties hold way more than simply 4 hearings. At least 1 has to be on a weekend or after 6 p.m. on a weekday to allow working people to attend. We would again recommend that all of them be held on weekends or on weeknights, so they're not at times that working people can't attend. And according to the law, if they're included in a standing meeting, they must start at a time certain so that people aren't showing up at 6:30 p.m. and then the redistricting agenda item is at 11:30 or whatever the case may be. The law mandates outreach, really for the first time ever. It says that local cities and counties have to provide redistricting information to local media, including non-English media. They have to provide, cities and counties have to provide info about redistricting to community organizations of various kinds, including those serving non-English speaking communities. And they have to maintain a redistricting webpage that has a wide variety of functions. It has to hold a calendar of hearings. It has to hold video of past hearings. It has to hold the draft maps. It has to provide a mechanism for people to be involved. So the public has to be able to provide public testimony at the hearings, and they have to be able to submit testimony or draft maps either at those hearings or via the website using a public submission process. There are language access requirements in AB 849. Every city and county has to provide translated content on redistricting. Now, there is template content provided by the Secretary of State, so we'll reduce the burden on cities and counties. And that content is already up on the Secretary of State's website. And live translation must be made available at a redistricting hearing if requested at least 72 hours before the hearing. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, what are the languages that apply for my city and for my county? Well, for the county, it's whatever languages where Section 203 of the Federal Voting Rights Act are applicable. So basically, the languages in which San Mateo County provides ballots are the languages in which the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors is going to have to provide translations. At the city level, there's a different calculation. It's any language, the translation must be provided in any language in which a limited English speaking members of that language community constitute 3% or more of the city's total population. And before you go trying to calculate that for every city with districts in San Mateo County, the Secretary of State is tasked with the job of identifying those languages for each city. One of the problems, though, is that the Census Bureau is supposed to provide the relevant data that the Secretary of State needs for its calculations. And as you have probably heard, the Census Bureau is awfully busy right now. And so this determination on city-by-city language access requirements has been delayed, and we're not exactly sure when it's going to become available. By contrast to all of these public outreach and education and engagement and public access requirements, you have school district, special district, and community college district redistricting, where there's basically nothing. There is no public outreach or education requirement. School districts and community college districts have no public hearing requirement, which I read to mean that they have to hold essentially 1 hearing at which they can present a draft map, discuss it, and then approve it. And special districts have to hold 2 hearings. So they have to hold 1 hearing in which they discuss redistricting, and then they can hold a second hearing at which they approve a map. Now, obviously, these are dramatically inadequate requirements. And if you want to be engaged on, let's say, your school district redistricting, you're going to have to do advocacy to your school district, your school board, quickly, I think, to fight for a better, more accessible process that allows the public to have a voice. All right, some last thoughts here. Redistricting timeline. I'm sure you've heard about the Census Bureau delaying release of redistricting data. And I want to give you some insight into what that actually means for our redistricting processes here in California. So the new California Redistricting Commission is already underway. It is holding its business meetings now. Business meetings mean startup meetings. They are hiring a demographer, hiring legal counsel, building an outreach plan, determining how they're going to handle language access, and so on. Relatively shortly here, they're going to begin public education and outreach meetings. They actually have an outreach manager who is scheduling public speaking appearances, and they have a speaker request form. And I'd be happy to share that a link to that public request form with Petra, who can then share it with attendees today. But if you have a community meeting coming up and you'd like a member of the State Redistricting Commission to come speak to you, they are open to that. And in fact, the commission has divided the state into regions and assigned 2 commissioners to each region around the state. And so there are 2 commissioners on the State Redistricting Commission that have been assigned San Mateo County. And so you all should get to know those 2 people and help to educate them about the needs of the county. After they do a period of public education and outreach, they will then hold public input hearings where community members can come and give community of interest testimony about what they want their district lines to look like. They can come and they can say, Daly City should be in this state Senate district grouped with these other communities. It should not be grouped with, whatever the case may be, San Francisco, for example. This part of the county is distinct from this other part of the county and should be kept in 2 different districts, or, whatever the case may be. Census data will be available as late as September 30th of this year, which is going to create some complications. What's probably going to happen is that I'll rephrase that. What's definitely going to happen is that the State Commission is going to gather a ton of public input from the community at their community of interest public input hearings. And then late in the game, they're going to get the redistricting data and they're going to blend them together in that period after September 30th and before their deadline of December 15th. It's going to be very, very quick. Though I think what is likely going to happen is that the commission is going to use the powers granted to it to extend its deadline. And we're not sure exactly what that new deadline will be, but it probably will be sometime in January, okay? So they're going to give themselves a little bit of extra time, but not a lot. And that extension includes the holidays, so they're going to have less availability. Local timelines, if you're a jurisdiction that uses the primary election in 2022, your deadline is December 15th. If you're a jurisdiction that does not use the primary and only uses the 2022 general, your deadline is April 17th of 2022. But we and other partners are working with the legislature to possibly pass legislation that will move that December 15th deadline back to give local jurisdictions more time to redistrict. And we may end up moving the primary back as well to create more time for the redistricting process. That doesn't mean that jurisdictions should wait. They should start now for planning and staffing up around redistricting. And they should be hearing from the community long before redistricting data is available. And if you want a commission for your city or for your county, it's time to act now. Particularly for jurisdictions that use the primary, they need to be making that decision within the next month or so. For those of you who are visual learners, I know I've had a lot of text in my presentation today. I just want to say the way this is done well is you start by centering community input in the redistricting process. You create a transparent and inclusive process that allows community voice to be heard. And the end result is an equitable district maps that allow for representation for all of our communities. That looks a little bit like this. It's sort of strange to see people talking to one another without masks, but this is the city of Sunnyvale's districting process in which they had pop-up events. They went into the community, they met community where community was and got input on a variety of maps and really took the time to lift up community voice in the process. It was not driven by incumbents. They did not put themselves in the driver's seat. They let the community drive. And that's what we want to see in city and county redistrictings and school redistrictings across the state of California. Here's a link to our resources yet again. And you can go there now and you'll get a number of resources, but we're adding more resources in the months to come. And if you have questions for Common Cause about local redistricting, you can reach us at an email address we've dedicated to this topic, redistrictingca@commoncause.org. And that's it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jonathan. You're, of course, not off the hook because we're going to have a lot of questions and answers. I'm sure we've got some great ones already in the chat. Before that, I want to apologize because we have a bunch of elected officials on the call and I didn't recognize them. And so I'm now recognizing them. Thank you very much for coming and for participating in this. We really appreciate you being here and representing us and educating yourselves about the redistricting process. And now I would like to, before we go to questions, have Sham talk a little bit about what nonprofits can do as far as redistricting. I know very often nonprofits are worried that they can't do stuff because it's lobbying, but you can. And that is the whole point of the Boulder Advocacy Program at Alliance for Justice. And so they will, Sham will explain what the rules are. Sham is based in Northern California, and he assists nonprofit organizations in pursuing legal and effective advocacy to advance their public policy goals. And again, Boulder Advocacy has been a terrific friend to Thrive and a great resource. So thank you, Sham, for stepping in.
Thanks, Petra, and thanks, Jonathan. That was super informative about the redistricting process. So as Petra said, I'm with the Boulder Advocacy Program of Alliance for Justice, along with my colleague, Sarah Matlin, who's here as well. And we have resources for nonprofits on the rules that impact their advocacy, and for foundations too. So you can go to our website, boulderadvocacy.org. We have short fact sheets and longer publications, including some specific resources on how nonprofits can influence the redistricting process, which Sarah has put in the chat, and it's also on Thrive's redistricting resources page. So if you have questions about how your nonprofit can legally engage, whether that's around getting community input or commenting on the maps themselves, please feel free to reach out to us. Our technical assistance service is free. You can email us at advocacy@afj.org or give us a call at 1-866-NP-LOBBY, and someone will get back to you. We are lawyers, but we don't give legal advice. We can direct you to the right legal resource or give you legal information that can help you answer your question. When it comes to redistricting, fortunately, there's a lot of ways that nonprofits can get involved. The IRS does set certain limitations on lobbying for 501c3 charitable organizations, and we can talk with you about when your redistricting advocacy might be lobbying and how to figure out what your limits are. But there are also a lot of activities that you can be involved in that will not be considered lobbying under IRS rules. So generally speaking, if you're educating the public about the redistricting process, why it's important, how they can get involved, as Jonathan talked about, that won't be considered lobbying under IRS rules, or just educating lawmakers or elected officials just about your community, helping them learn more about various communities of interest. Also, generally, if you're just asking them to comply with the law, maybe you're asking them to do some specific outreach or comply with the language access requirements of a new law, and you're not asking for a new law to be passed, generally speaking, that will not be lobbying activity. So if you have questions about the lobbying definition, including what foundations may be able to fund around redistricting advocacy, please feel free to reach out to us.
Sorry about that. You guys are a fantastic resource, and we really appreciate that. So I'm hoping that everyone takes advantage of the resources Boulder Advocacy has, the resources A Common Cause has. You can find all of that on our website. It's super easy. Under special initiatives, you can find redistricting, and we'd like to have our web page be a central place for San Mateo County. So as these hearings come up and the dates for the hearings come up and what the advocacy is, we would like to have all of that on our webpage. So I'm going to ask you all to help by letting us know, because I know many of you are going to be involved in your local redistricting. And we have 16 jurisdictions that are redistricting. We have one that is districting for the first time, City of Burlingame. There's talk about possibly the San Mateo Union High School District districting as well. So that's a lot of moving pieces. And some of you will be interested in many of those, and some of you are only going to be interested in your very local one. So it would be great to have one place where we can do all of that. Pam put a a comment in the chat, and I actually want to talk about this because in San Mateo County, what happened on a county level for the Board of Supervisors was that the board got a presentation from some consultants that they hired, and there hasn't been a whole lot of community input. And when they had these consultants present, the consultants were like, "Oh, you guys should just pick people." The Board of Supervisors were like, "Oh, maybe we should have an advisory commission, that would be better." But there wasn't like an in-depth discussion about maybe what an independent commission would be. So the board, I'm actually going to throw this to Linda Wolland, who's here right now, and I'd like her to actually explain where we are in the process for the Board of Supervisors. And then I'd love to get feedback in this group right now if people think that this is something that they're interested in advocating on. So Linda, you unmute yourself.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Linda.
Oh, sorry, and introduce yourself, because I just didn't introduce you. I just assumed everybody knows you, but not everybody does.
Good morning. I'm Linda Wolland. I'm a senior legislative aide for Supervisor Dave Pine. And full disclosure and caveat, Supervisor Pine was not on the subcommittee involved in the redistricting proposal. So I'm just speaking as a staff who's very familiar with the process. The subcommittee is comprised of President David Canepa from District 5 and the Vice President Don Horsley from District 3, and they are currently working on it. So what happened was the proposal, as Petra explained, the consultants came and gave a presentation, and a vote was taken to establish an advisory commission. And but that's a board vote. It was just a motion, and technically the board could vote itself a different way. So I wanted to explain that, because I know there's some interest, since the public was not really involved in that decision at that time, there might not be appetite to revisit that decision, but the board could revisit that decision. So technically they can. So if you want to ask for that, you can. They may say no, I don't know. And when I say they, the subcommittee is going to make a recommendation to the rest of the board. And then it's just as any time, you need 3 members to vote in a certain direction for that to pass. So I really don't know what the appetite is of other board members. I know my own boss would be certainly open to another proposal if it were to be presented. In the meantime, so they made that motion to do an advisory commission, and then the subcommittee went back to work on what I'll call a straw man what the composition of that committee would be. And that was discussed at a recent board meeting. And at that time, because many people on this call had gotten engaged and understood the process, came to that meeting and advocated for a more independent, at least selection process. And that's how the idea of having the League of Women Voters be involved in selecting the commissioners was raised. And that's currently under negotiation between the League and that subcommittee. And I know there's some League members here who can speak more fluently about that. So that's still in progress. And a new proposal will be brought to the board about the composition of the commission. And that would be an opportunity to raise the issue of going back to independent, if that is the will of the group, or just go with the advisory commission and try to make that as best practice as you can. And I'm happy to take any questions in chat or elsewise.
Thank you, Linda. Are there any updates? I think both Marie and Tracy, the presidents of our 2 League of Women Voters, are on the call. Do you guys have any updates?
Well, this is Marie. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters for North and Central San Mateo County. And this is a request from the County Board of Supervisors that I'm taking to my board at our meeting this afternoon. And so for their consideration, and then I'll go back to Supervisor Canepa and Horsley with our response to their request.
Yeah, this is Tracy from South San Mateo County, and it's the same process. I'm going to get buy-in from my board, and then we'll talk again with the 2 supervisors.
Can we just do a poll, maybe take the spotlight off so we can see everybody? And then is there a kind of interest in this room to to try to push the county for an independent redistricting commission, just if you have a strong opinion right now. I know Pam Jones is very interested.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Somebody writing these down? Actually, if you guys could put it in the chat, that would be great. If there's a lot of yeses, I think I can send out, or Linda or whoever, we can send out kind of a sample email with what you should say or what you can say. And if you can contact your supervisor. Wow, okay. It looks like we might have started something. So super cool. Like, I think that this is why we're meeting. This is why we are together, so that we can make progress. And we in San Mateo County are very lucky. I keep hearing this from Jonathan, because I think our supervisors actually listen to us, which is great. So let's use that power and try to do that. So we will send a follow-up email to everybody on this list, as well as everybody who signed up for the last redistricting one, with information about how to go about this. We do not know if this is on the next Board of Supervisors agenda yet, because that hasn't come out officially. But I think the sooner we do this, the better. So thank you guys. And I'd like to go to some of the questions that people put in chat, and for Jonathan. And sorry, so first of all, somebody asked if the districting process just happened a couple of years ago, is there still redistricting? But Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong, everybody goes through redistricting with the results of the census, even if you just districted for the first time a couple of years ago?
That's right. Districting over the course of the last decade was completed using 2010 census data, which is, as we all know, badly out of date. And so every jurisdiction, no matter how recently they went through the districting process, needs to redistrict using the 2020 census data.
Great, thank you. And then let's go to a live question, then we'll go back to the chat questions. Elsa? You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks so much. And thank you, Linda. Can we know more than 2 days ahead when this vote will be on the supervisor's agenda, so that we could actually be there? We can clearly write ahead. That's fabulous. But it would possibly be helpful to be there to give our little 2-minute speeches when at the correct meeting. But sometimes the meeting agenda comes out, it seems, at least only a day or two ahead of time. So it's a little harder to get everybody there. Linda, any chance we could find out sooner than that when the issue will come up for a vote?
Yeah, so apologies in general on behalf of the whole board, the whole county team, is that our agendas have been coming really late lately during COVID, because so many emergency measures. Because it's a subcommittee working on it and the Brown Act, I actually find out the same time that the public does. So I would encourage everyone to be in touch with the subcommittee members, with Supervisor Horsley and Canepa, as they will know, and maybe specifically ask them to, perhaps include Thrive and some outreach in advance, because they'll know, as I said before, I do. And also, since the league is so will potentially be heavily involved with the advisory commission, the league may also know sooner than I do.
Great, thank you so much.
Oh, and Pam also just had is that Pam? Yeah, that really good suggestion, that you can speak from the floor at any meeting about non-agenda items. So if folks want to come next Tuesday at 9 a.m. and speak at that first public comment on a non-agenda item, that's a great suggestion. And you could even suggest that you get notice of when the redistricting measure will be there.
Thank you, Linda. David, do you want to go ahead with your question? David Pollock?
Yeah, thank you. Instead of just trying to write it. So when I hear the discussion around redistricting, and especially around school districts, it seems like the movement to district elections in that school district, and that's a better assurance of equity and diversity. Sequoia Union has gone down that path. There's a current pushback in the community, that it hasn't been especially equitable, hasn't brought a lot of diversity. Now San Mateo Union is moving towards district elections. Is there another approach that can assure a little bit more equity and diversity? I've heard of proportional voting as one solution, but where to start?
Petra, would you like me to take that question?
Oh, yes, please.
Sure. So, David, it's a great question. There is no one structural reform that is going to be a magic bullet for this question of equity in representation. I would say that there are other reforms that push in that direction. So, for example, campaign finance reform is a really important piece of this puzzle. It's not talked about much at the school district level. It's usually talked about at higher levels. But the reality is that anyone who has to raise $30,000 or $50,000 in order to run a successful local campaign probably needs to have money or have access to money or have access to networks of power and wealth in order to run successfully. And so if you change the campaign finance rules so that you can fundraise in smaller amounts from local community members, you may have more representation at the community level. But even that, I don't think, is a magic bullet. I think the real answer, unfortunately, is the hard work of deep civic engagement and organizing. It's building leadership programs. It's doing capacity building in local community organizations that reach communities and new leaders that are not historically part of the power structure. And that just means making investments in multi-year organizing and multi-year capacity building in the communities that have been ignored with philanthropic decisions and so on in the past.
Thank you, Jonathan. And that's the kind of stuff that we are hoping as Thrive to keep tabs on and to just elevate the programs. There are some programs already existing in San Mateo County that are working on building leadership, and we're supporting them. Georgia, did you want to add something? No. Okay, and Suzanne Moore, do you want to go ahead and ask your question live?
Sure. I'm from Pacifica, and we just had district elections and just elected 2 new people, or we'll have 2 new seats that were now represented. But if we have redistricting, how will elections of the new district rep occur?
So the new district lines will be used in 2022, and the individuals who, obviously the new electeds will replace the electeds whose terms end in 2022. But the rule of redistricting is that no one's term can be cut short because of districting or redistricting. So there is a weird transition period at the beginning of each decade where you have the first, in 2022, you elect a set of representatives from the new districts, but you still have representatives on your city council or on your county board of supervisors from the old districts. And then in 2024, in the second election in the decade, you end up, the people from the old districts are termed out then and run again, or are replaced by new representatives that are using the new district. So there is this weird transition period in which you can sometimes get some quirky outcomes, but that's just, there's no way around it, unfortunately. It's just inherent in redrawing district lines. But the general rule is that no one's term is cut short because of districting or redistricting. You get to complete your term.
Thank you.
That was actually really interesting because for the Board of Supervisors, some are up for election and some are not. So what happens if you're new, if there's overlap between the new and the old and one person?
You end up, okay, let's just say as an example, I mean, it's easier with a whiteboard, honestly, and I know we only have 4 minutes left, but let's say that in 2020, let's say that there's 2 council members who, I'm speaking completely theoretically, I don't know where your board of supervisors live. I want to be really clear about that. Let's just say theoretically you had two supervisors who lived in North County. And right now they live in different districts. They're elected from two different districts. The districts are redrawn, and one of them is elected in 2022, would be up for re-election in 2022, and one of them would be up for re-election in 2024. Let's say the districts are redrawn and they're drawn into the same district, okay? In 2022, you would have a re-election from that district, and you might have a second supervisor living in the same district for a 2-year period, because the person gets to complete their term. And then in 2024, that person would either have to move to the newly drawn district if they want to run again, or they don't run again and someone else runs to represent the new district. That didn't sound very clear as it was coming out of my mouth. I hope it made sense to somebody. But the fact of the matter is you end up with these weird quirks when you go through in the first two election cycles after redistricting, because you can't cut people's terms short after the redistricting process. And you can't simply say, okay, we drew new districts in 2021. Let's reelect our entire county board of supervisors in 2022 using the new district lines. In order to do that, you'd have to cut short the terms of folks, the 4-year terms of folks who were elected in 2020.
Great, thank you. I'd like to do a little crowdsourcing right now, because we've got a lot of enthusiastic people here, and I think there've been a couple of requests for things like scripts for both for speaking and for writing to your supervisors about the redistricting commission for the on the board of supervisors level, but those would actually be useful as well for the local stuff. So what I'd love is if somebody wants to write that up and send it to us, happy to post it on our webpage as stuff that's submitted, happy to send out emails to all of you guys with other people's writing, but I'd like you who are the community advocates, you guys should be the ones, it should be your voice. So send it to us. We will be a clearinghouse for information, but we'd love for you guys to do the actual writing. So I know there are many of you that would be happy to do that. So just send it all to us and we'll figure out how to disseminate it. But we will use our webpage. We've already created, thank you, Diane Leeds, a list of all of the places that have redistricting and how many have hired consultants and all of that. So there will be links to that as well. If there are other things you want, reach out to me. You can also reach out to Sarah, who's on this call, and we'll get it up. It seems like the next thing that would be really interesting is to have one of the state level redistricting commissioners to come and talk about our state level issues. And on the last call, it was brought up that, for instance, Daly City on the state level is put in with San Francisco and therefore sort of gets ignored. So that would be something that we'd be talking about to those commissioners. So we will work with Jonathan to get the name of the right people and invite them. Besides that, I want to say huge thank you to Jonathan and Sean. Thank you for stepping up in the last minute. And thank you to all of you for being involved in this process, because it's really important. So you'll be hearing from us again. And we will be sending our thank you email, our email with resources out soon. So if you guys can get me your letters soon, that would be awesome. And have a great day.
Many thanks, Petra, and everybody. That was terrific.
Nice to see you, Elsa.
Thanks, Petra. Thrive, Common Cause.